Hey everyone, I hope you're doing well. It is Tuesday, September 20th, 2022, and welcome to Soul Strengthening Sessions. Tonight we are talking about the divine exchange, going from the old to the new, and specifically in the realm of the mind. I'm very excited to share this. Last week I actually shared on the foundational and fundamental parts of self, and tonight we're going to get a little bit deeper into this. So the divine exchange, what is that? This is a foundational spiritual principle of being a regenerated, reborn, restored spirit. And once that has happened, that pours into our soul realm. And tonight we are going to get into the soul realm. We have adopted this idea of old to new in our everyday life by desire, and it's instinctive. But how can we truly live a transformed life? And when we walk into this newness of life that we desire, are we strengthened with the courage, confidence, and ability to live in it? Tonight we are going to get into how to do this. Because at the end of the day, we all want to live our fullest and most abundant life. That's why we're here. That's why we're on this journey. That's why we're learning. So before I get into this, I'm going to overview what we're going to discuss. I'm going to be using my 3 to 5 step process of processing pain, and I'm going to adopt this for this specific topic, okay? So the 3 are acknowledge, accept and embrace, and process. Tonight we are going to learn about unlearning thought patterns so that we can renew our mind with good thought patterns. Okay? So there is something or a handful of things in your life right now that is probably not going the way you hoped. Take a moment to think about what that is for you. Some of this is beyond your control. Today, we're not concerned with that. Neither are we concerned with other people's contribution to this disappointment that you are facing today, or right now, or the season that you're in. That's for another class. Tonight, we're focused on self and how we handle those disappointments that come against us. Okay? Last week, as I shared earlier, I shared on the fundamentals of self. Now, tonight, we're going to talk about this divine exchange between old self and new self, and specifically the importance of the mental emotional shift that must take place to be fully present in and when you begin to live in and walk in new life, spirit, soul, and body. Okay, so let's start with acknowledge. Tonight we need to acknowledge firstly that there are, as I call them, 2 pillars of the human experience that has contributed to our broken state. The first is our childhood and upbringing. Because we are all imperfect beings, we inherited brokenness from our families, from our parents, from our guardians, and we learned certain ways to live that were unhealthy. We learned certain coping mechanisms that were unhealthy. We learned subconsciously even, because as children, and children do not have the capacity to control what they're receiving until they're old enough to decide what they're receiving. So in many respects, we've inherited whatever we've received as children. That has formed our thought patterns, our thought life, and clearly has influenced our emotional patterns, our emotional life, and our life overall. that is the first pillar. The second pillar is our life experience that we have accumulated over time, and clearly as adults, the experiences that we have had and have carried. Okay, these two are foundational for you to understand when it comes to unlearning negative and unhealthy thought patterns and relearning positive and healthy thought patterns. Okay, the second part to this is to accept and embrace. And what are we accepting here? We are accepting that we are going to be unlearning patterns of thoughts, emotional processing, and behavior. Now this is a complete and direct correlation to the soul, because soul is mind, emotions, and will. So the thought patterns that we have adopted or inherited and accumulated over time pour into our emotional processing, and therefore pour into our behaviors, our habits, and ultimately how we live our life. So tonight we're going to learn how to accept this about ourselves, how to embrace it so that we can process it. And this third step of processing is the renewal part. It is the exchange. It is exchanging old thoughts for new thoughts, old patterns for new patterns. And this is in the mind, this is balancing the emotions, and this is sound judgment, which is actually decision making. Okay? So let's begin with unlearning these thought patterns. Okay? Our thoughts are made up of everything we have ever heard, read, or consumed in the form of words, images, and the overall human experience. And not everything we think is true, good, right, lovely, or pure. It is our responsibility to be the gatekeeper of our mind, and as I like to call it, spiritual gold. Because our mind is, I actually have a video on this. I called it Gatekeepers of Spiritual Gold. And I actually, it's a series which I'm continuing, but that's the first one. It's the mind. Next to our heart, our mind is our most prized possession. And when you get that revelation for yourself, you'll begin to have a massive perspective shift on what you choose to take in. Just because the TV's on doesn't mean I have to watch it. Just because the radio's on doesn't mean I have to listen. And just because someone speaks negatively doesn't mean I have to receive it. We have the free will to decide what we allow in our eye and ear gates. We were created with free will. That is one of the most blessed inheritance from God, is to have free will to decide how we live our life. So because these things formulate our thought life, we have the choice to choose to believe what truth is for our life course. Okay? Now, as I mentioned earlier, as children, we had little to no control on this. But as we got older, we began to learn certain thought patterns based on what we experienced. And not all of this was good for us. All of this we have to, as adults, learn how to sort through it and choose what we want to believe is truth for our life, for self, and for our future. Okay, so where do we begin? So we're going to begin with the acknowledge part. As I said, not everything I learned and experienced was true and good for me. In fact, tonight I'm going to ask you to write a little bit because this is part of the reflecting, and this is relating to my workshop that I shared recently, Reflect, Release, and Restore. So here's our first assignment, to acknowledge that not everything you learned and experienced was true. Number one was true, and number two was good for you. So I'm going to ask you here to write down 1 to 3 things that you may reflect on in your own life that you know this about. Now, this can be anything. This can be experiences that you had. This can be a relationship dynamic with a family member. It can be anything. So take a couple of minutes and write this down. Now, this is acknowledge. To acknowledge something is really the first step to conquering whatever's in front of you, because you are literally facing it and you're making a decision that you're going to address it. And this is what we're doing, okay? So let's move on to number 2. Number 2 is accept and embrace. And for this one, I'd like you to write this down. I need to learn to unlearn some of the things I learned because they do not abide in truth or goodness for myself and my life. Now here you're going to write down 1 to 3 ways that you can see or understand how this hurt or damaged yourself or the course of your life. Okay? So I'm going to give you a minute or so to write that down. And I'm going to check. Okay. Number 3, to process. And here is the crux of this process when it comes to unlearning unhealthy thought patterns that have led you down some really bad places and dangerous roads. I'm certainly sitting here by the grace of God, having been delivered and having been given the grace and the mercy to be set free from some very dark and dangerous places and spaces, both physically, or actually all of it, physically, mentally, emotionally. But it didn't come by osmosis. It was certainly the favor and grace of God. It was coming to the end of self and realizing I cannot do this on my own. And it was going through the process, which is what I teach on, the inner healing process. And this is what we're going to do tonight. So renewing the mind. The divine exchange is a literal and spiritual exchange of our old and broken spirit to a new and restored spirit. So again, we are spirit, soul, and body. The first transformation that takes place in self is our spiritual rebirth. Now, in our inner healing journey of the soul, we walk this out beginning with this process of renewing our mind. Okay, so what is to renew? To renew is to make new again. Renewal and renewing is a continual, perpetual state of making something new. In this instance, we're talking about renewing our mind. So, doing this with our mind means that we are constantly exchanging old, erroneous thoughts, or thoughts rooted old thought patterns that are rooted in what is not good, what is not true about ourselves. And that's what we're targeting tonight, is ourself. And we're exchanging this for the new truth-rooted and good thought patterns. So, for example, if growing up you were told, in quotes, I'm going to say this, you're worthless. That is a negative and erroneous declaration. It may have come from someone that you trusted and loved. You may have spent years with this person and hearing these detrimental and destructive words, but they are not true and they are not good. To unlearn this, which in this instance may have become a self-belief, if you grew up hearing these words,